Hello, everyone, and hi, Kerrie and Robert.
Good morning.
We're going to spend the next 2 hours with Kerrie and Robert fielding your questions relating to business interruption and lost profits engagements. Both Kerrie and Robert have been presenting on this topic over the past few weeks, specifically to how COVID-19 has impacted business interruptions and lost profits. Kerrie Merrifield is a CPA. She holds the Accredited in Business Valuation, ABV credential, Certified in Financial Forensics, CFF credential, and also holds NACVA's Master Analyst in Financial Forensics certification. She's been working in the accounting, forensic accounting, and litigation support field for over 30 years, focusing on family law matters, civil complex litigation, forensic accounting, family law, business valuation, and economic damage analysis. She's been qualified as an expert and has testified in expert witness cases, both bench and jury trials. Robert Carter is a CPA. He holds the CFF, Certified in Financial Forensics, also NACVA's Certified Valuation Analyst certification, the CFE, and also is a CEPA, Certified Exit Planning Advisor. Robert is with Hertzbaugh, Certified Public Accountants in Maryland. He manages the Litigation and Forensics Valuation Department for that firm. He manages several forensic accounting and fraud investigations involving misappropriation of assets, intellectual property, and embezzlement claims. He provides expert witness services for marital dissolution, stockholder and partnership disputes, personal injury, lost profits claims, as well as other white-collar criminal and civil matters. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, you're welcome. You spent a lot of hours over the past several weeks presenting on this topic. We appreciate you coming back to field questions and answers from our attendees. But to get us started, why don't you both take a couple of minutes to sort of lay the stage or set the stage for us as to what's happening currently in this space, a summary or an overview of some of the topics that you previously discussed. And since you last presented, we met yesterday to prepare for today. There's even more developments that have happened in the recent past few days that you both wanted to share with us. So why don't you take a couple of minutes to sort of set the stage before we dive into more specific Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Brian. And thank you everybody for attending today. And as Brian said, this is it's not a representation of the webinars that we've done the previous 2 times. This is just going to be to answer all your questions. We're going to also address some of the questions that we've had before in the webinars that we did not have a chance to get to. And also that we have some updates on some of the questions that maybe we didn't have answers to at that time, or maybe the answers have changed. During the webinar, please, as I said, this is a Q&A session, so please send in your questions. We will address them as they come in. We just want to take a few moments to kind of just give you some updates on things that we have discovered and heard of and learned about in the past week or so. I took the liberty of calling a few. I wanted to get, before the Q&A session, I kind of wanted to get the perspective from the insurance companies and also from the attorneys that are taking on these denied claims and bringing them into litigation. So upon my research into insurance companies, I called 2 insurance companies. I was met with, I have no comment, we're not allowed to give a comment, and basically just hang up the phone. So the insurance companies are not speaking about what is going on. They have nothing to say. From what I've heard, there has not been one insurance claim related to business interruption lost profits related to the COVID-19 virus that has been paid throughout the United States. Not one claim has been paid. So this takes us to our next other side of it, attorneys that work in business interruption lost profit litigation, which is becoming, I spoke to one attorney, he's already gotten calls from business owners in different stages. Some even call before they even file a claim to say, hey, you know, I need to know how to go about this. Can you policy. I've heard everybody's getting denied, help me out. Are people that are in the process of their claims and they're worried about, what if it gets denied? And then there's the business owners that have already had their claims denied that are coming to seek legal services. So on that side, I gained some some information on what has been going on in the insurance industry and why are all these claims being denied. And so the insurance industry has started out very early in this, and I'm probably talking March, that they have informed their agents to tell business owners when they call that, to dissuade them from filing, saying, no, it's not covered in the policy, and, there's no need to file a claim. And after that, they're told that, no, there's no virus coverage, there's nothing, in your policy that states that. And then they did a study, a nationwide study, which is really unusual. And it's really so early in the game that it's kind of surprising that they did it this fast, but they're being preemptive to kind of dissuade business owners from filing because they're putting out the message that if everybody files, all the insurance companies are going to go bankrupt. And in the study, they stated that they had about $670 billion in cash reserves, and that if they were to have claims of like $250 to $330 billion coverage per month, that they'd go bankrupt in like 2 months' time. But this was kind of a disingenuous study in the information given and how it's portrayed. So just last year, that the insurance companies actually had about $650 billion in just premiums, and they only paid out $75 billion in business interruption loss claims. So basically what they're saying they had in cash reserves is what they had in their premiums that were collected. And also this information is based on what the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Companies, is trying to kind of gather information to know what is their exposure. So they're asking insurance companies to send them information on the companies that have business interruption loss policy coverages for large companies, small companies, medium companies, and how many of them have civil authority clauses in them. So they're really trying to get some information to really kind of cover their exposure before, as I said, nobody has had a claim paid on this yet. So that's one thing that the insurance agencies are doing there. I think it's really important to know that when you're filing these claims, that these are going to be the obstacles that you're coming up against, and these are kind of the reasons behind it. And what the insurance, just remember, the insurance agents have to do what they're told to do. So it's, by the insurance industry, this is just their job. So just to be aware of what you're going to be up against when you're going to be filing these claims. So what they did in the study that I was just talking about is they took this from all insurance companies, but they didn't figure into, when they say they're going to burn like, $250 to $330 billion per month, they didn't take into account that some businesses, they just took all businesses in general across the nation, that some businesses don't even have business insurance policies. Some business policies might not even have business interruption coverage. Some businesses, might have exclusions. So they didn't take into all these factors when they came up with these numbers. So these numbers are skewed. So if any of you see this study or, get this study kind of thrown at you as why they're, rejecting it, or, oh my gosh, we're going to go bankrupt, to kind of just keep this information in the back of your mind of, what factors were considered or not considered in this. And so, as I said, and then there's the issues of claims that are going into litigation. A lot of them are going to be the restaurant claims. That's probably, I think, the biggest number of businesses that are really affected. And another really unique, and I know there's probably some people on this webinar that are, say you're a dentist, or you're a plastic surgeon, or you're an orthodontist or something like that. You were deemed an essential worker. So how is this going to work if you were not declared a non-essential worker and your business closed, but you're a dentist, but you have to do say somebody falls down and breaks a tooth out, or they need a root canal, or they have something that they need your services for. So you perform these services because you are an essential worker, you can perform them, but your business is not allowed to operate because you are an elective surgery type of doctor, something like that. So it gets really complicated and really sticky in certain situations like that, and how you're classified, what you do. So these are the types of cases that are going to litigation right now, and these are some of the things that are happening with the businesses. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say, just to kind of give everybody kind of an update on what's going on. Robert, do you have anything?
No, that was a great update and important information that people need to know if they're going to go forward with these claims, whether through the insurance or litigation. I don't want to take up too much time because we really are here for the questions and answers, but I think the really important thing here, beyond what you had told us, is that it's an evolving situation. There's companies that are going to be in trouble right now. They could be in more trouble within a few months when a lot of the stimulus runs out. If there ends up being a second wave of all of this down the road, again, could also impact all of this. So just be aware that it's kind of a moving target, and we don't necessarily have all the answers now because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But just take everything that we know so far, what we've talked about so far, into consideration when you're trying to take one of these claims.
Yeah, and one big question I know is going to get asked and was asked, and I do kind of have an answer, non-answer, is, what if, for example, businesses start to open, they're in their ramp-up period, say a restaurant can open 25%, 50%, and then boom, we have a second wave that hits us, and then the government, there's another shutdown order. How does that affect the claim? Is it part of the original claim? Is it a new claim? How does that get factored in? So the answer to this is we don't know. It's still in discussion. Nobody knows. Attorneys don't know. Insurance companies don't know. Nobody knows. This is such uncharted territory that there are so many unknowns, and we haven't gotten to that situation yet. There's so many things that we're dealing with right now that since that hasn't happened yet, we don't have an answer for it. So, and that's probably going to end up being a question that's going to be answered in the courts. But I know that question was asked previously, and I've asked the question, and that's something that there really is, right at this point in time, no answer to. So just to keep that in mind when you're doing these claims, that, when that happens, don't think you should have the answer. You should know. You're not missing any information.
Right. Well, how are the government programs impacting these claims?
So I know we talked about this, I guess, in the first day or two when we did this. One of the big ones is this payroll protection loan that might be forgiven. So to the extent you get that, it helps people to continue operating, but at the same time, any money that's forgiven is going to be mitigated against any sort of claim. So there's a couple other ones that are out there that are handled similarly, but I think it's important to mention, it kind of goes to what Kerrie was talking about earlier, where they had that study that said this is how much the insurance companies will be paying out, but I'm sure in the study they didn't necessarily mitigate it for those forgiven funds and the decreased amounts of what's actually going to have to be paid out. So just things to keep in mind, and that's just one of the stimulus areas, but there are a number of other ones going along with the unemployment side of things. A lot of companies were deciding to keep people or let them go based on the fact that the unemployment was paying a little bit more than what it historically did. And so if that's not going to continue, you may keep those employees on to help them out, but that then increases the loss, or the insurance company may not be willing to pay off those additional losses for you deciding to keep people instead of mitigating.
Yeah, it seems to be a common thread here, is that as we continue through these next weeks and months, that the situation will continue to evolve. We've got a great question here. We'll jump into the questions now. And again, if those of you who are on the webinar have a question, please use the Q&A function in your Zoom dashboard to submit your question, and we'll pose that here to Kerrie and Robert and try to get to as many as we can. And we'll start with this one. What are your opinions pertaining to potential coverage of business interruption claims as a result of COVID-19?
I guess we can both answer. I'll answer first. What is my opinion pertaining to the potential coverage? This is going to be an individual policy answer. It's going to really depend on the policies. A lot of policies, if your policy doesn't have any exclusions in there, you're probably gonna have a very good chance that it's gonna be covered even if you have to go into litigation. So the answer really is going to depend on the policy language. There are some policies out there that they use the dictionary for exclusions. So those are going to be the ones that's going to be really tough, or if not impossible, to have coverage because of this. But I'm going to say there's a good amount of insurance policies where it's very vague and it's not put as an exclusion that, you know, there is going to be a good potential for coverage. And I don't know if there's many business owners on here, or, you know, everybody that's attending, let your clients know, let business owners know that, you know, if they've talked to their insurance agent and they're telling them, you know, don't file because you're not covered. We don't cover viruses or anything like that. Please file anyway. Even if you get denied, you know, ask an attorney, am I really, is it a good cause for denial? So, you know, as I said, I think the potential coverage is going to depend on each policy's language.
Right, I would agree with that. And to add on to the language piece, I mean, it depends if you're talking about, again, a civil authority, or you're dealing with something that says it has to be structural damage versus sort of bacteria can be included, or the fact that you can't go to your office. I know during the earlier sessions, we also talked about the fact that it may be because something else closed that's related to your business that you're allowed to then claim a loss because the vendor or a similar type of company has shut down, which reduced your own operations. So it's really important to read through the policy, because there are a number of policies that are going to be relevant and able to claim that some sort of damages. It's just, you have to be careful to read it and make sure you understand what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Yeah, so as Barbara said, it might not be directly, your business might not be directly affected by the COVID-19. It might not trigger something in that part of your insurance policy, but maybe something is triggered as far as, you know, you have somebody down the supply chain and that's affected your business. So it may be, you may have something triggered because of that. Could be civil authority, something is triggered in your policy because of that. So that all does relate to COVID-19, but you know, just make sure that you're aware of that there's more things than just the closing of the business that can be covered and triggered in a policy to make a claim.
Got another great question. If companies have to resort to litigation to get coverage for loss, can an insured also receive legal fees as a remedy? If not, isn't that going to be a hindrance to seeking a legal option?
So I think that's really going to depend. I mean, there's definitely not a yes or no answer to this right now, because a lot of times it's going to be up to the judge in question and how they see it. But I agree, to the extent the judges do allow it, that's definitely, you know, encourage people to actually take that route. And I could definitely see it be a hindrance to say, I'm going to incur $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in costs to recover whatever amount you're trying to recover. Where I see that really taking off has less to do with that particular case, but if there's a few cases that start winning, there's gonna be more insurance companies that are probably more willing to pay out at some point once they realize they're gonna be overturned in court. It's just nobody wants to be that first person to actually approve a claim, but once they're seeing that actually happens and the courts are gonna agree with it, that's where you'll start seeing more of these claims being negotiated or paid out without going through litigation. So unfortunately, there's no real answer to whether the fees will be paid just yet, but it's a really good trend if it's, you know, denied in bad faith, or, you know, how the judge feels about the case.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that there are also attorneys that will work on a contingency basis. So if you know, there's a business owner that doesn't have those deep pockets or isn't able to afford to retain an attorney, there are often attorneys, especially I believe when there's such a big amount of cases that are going to go to litigation, that will take these cases on a contingency fee. So that might be an option as well, is to you know, look for an attorney that would do that.
We have another question as well. I have a business interruption lost profits claim due to reasons other than COVID-19, i.e. construction defect. What is the best way to incorporate the economic impact on the pandemic when projecting but for and currently expected profits?
So sorry, go ahead, Kerrie. Sorry. So again, this is one of those ones that's going to depend a little bit, and you have to look at what the projections were prior to the pandemic and what they're also expecting now. The issue is that you can't just take the benefit of what they were going to do and ignore the pandemic. I realize you're trying to incorporate that into your answer here, but you have to find a way to come up with what's a reasonable expectation of what they would have been able to do based on the current restrictions that are out there. Whether people couldn't have gone to the business, again, I'm not sure what type of business we're talking about other than the fact that it was a construction defect. But if people couldn't go to that business, clearly your revenue might drop off completely. Or if it's in one of those ones that's phasing back in at 25%, 50%, et cetera, factor those into your analysis as best you can. It's especially when you're talking about the but for, because this is what they would have been able to do had the defect not happened. Unfortunately, there's no good way to do it, but you have to monitor everything that's happening over time in terms of legal ramifications and try and come up with what would be supportable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I would just say try to, I know, this is such a huge event that's happening worldwide, and the economic impact is just felt in every industry. But if I was doing something that wasn't related to COVID-19, I would really try and keep a perspective and treat it like I would any other economic condition. For example, when we had the 2008 housing, collapse, or when we have, big events that happen in history, just take it into consideration, factor it in. There's a lot of unknowns, but just as I said, it's going to depend on the industry that you're in and what is projected to be out, what is projected to happen in the next 12 months, 18 months, or whatever, however far your analysis goes out, and just kind of treat it as an economic situation is what I would do. But I wouldn't treat it as like, it's not like it's in that, for that type of a claim, I would just treat it as such, and just do your best to use industry data that we have.
Mm-hmm. What is the public adjusters or the insurance advocate's role in this process? In these claims?
I would say, the public adjusters and insurance advocates' roles in these claims are to minimize damages, are to minimize claim payouts, and be as preemptive as possible to do so. And that's what I've seen to date. And of course, even without the COVID-19, of course, that's going to be the insurance companies and public adjusters. Usually, is to minimize payouts, is to minimize claims, but usually it's also to be fair. I think in this case, just because it's so overwhelming, and the amount of claims and the dollars that are going to be paid out on these claims, or should be paid out normally on these claims, is just astronomical, that it's very scary for the insurance industry. And I think their role right now is basically, they don't have a lot to say. They're doing what the insurance industry is kind of leading them to do while they're trying to figure out their exposure and how to handle these cases until somebody wants to be that first one to pay out a claim.
Right.
Robert?
So I would kind of agree with that, but it's really, at this point, there's kind of little that they can do. I mean, I know they're trying to help out essentially the policyholder at that point, but if things are going to be denied right away, there's not as much for them to do with the insurance company, because it's going to go to the litigation route. I think where there's going to be more that they can do is going to be after some of these start getting paid out by the insurance companies down the road.
I have a question. If my policy covers claim preparation fees and I hire a consultant to prepare my claim, how can I recoup my claim preparation fee if my claim gets denied?
Robert, you want to do one?
So, I mean, this is another one of those ones that every insurance company is going to be a little different. Usually if they're saying you don't actually have a claim, it's not denied, you're not going to get reimbursed for it. I think this is where you take it that second step to litigation. And at that point, that it gets rolled into your overall loss to try and get reimbursed for that if it's part of the policy. And if the judge deems that it was a legitimate claim, then that's where it'll get covered. But I don't think you're going to be able to get reimbursed if they decide that it's not a legitimate claim.
Any comments on that?
In these cases, with all of the claims being denied, I think it's definitely well worth following up and getting legal advice on that. In a normal situation, the insurance company is usually pretty fair. about, you know, what's going to be covered and not covered. This is just a unique situation where I would say don't take the denial and just walk away and say, darn, I'm not covered.
Right. I mean, they don't really want to encourage people to put claims in by saying we're going to cover your cost to put a claim in.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I'm not saying everybody that's been affected by this virus is going to have, is wrongfully denied. There are some business owners that unfortunately their policy will exclude this, and it is a valid denial. So I just want to make it clear that not all denials are wrongfully denied. There are going to be some that are rightfully denied.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts regarding a business's responsibility to mitigate losses? For example, if a state says you can reopen, but the business owners or employees don't feel it is safe, one could argue that they could have been mitigated. There could have been mitigation that did not occur.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's probably going to come up a lot in certain industries, for example, even restaurants. But once the kind of shutdown order is lifted by the government, then the coverage period is going to end. So that's going to end there. So what you do after that is, you know, going to decide, you know, is going to be, how can I say, an argument for the insurance company to not cover those costs. So once it is lifted, that closure order is lifted, then you do have an obligation to mitigate your damages, which means by opening, whether you feel safe or not, you need to take all precautions. But after that point, it's most likely, I'm not going to say 100% sure, because it could be on a case-by-case basis. There may be really unique circumstances that surround it. So I'm not going to blanket it and say for sure that you must do it. There may be circumstances that really are valid, but as a general blanket statement, I would say once those closure orders are lifted, you do have an obligation to open, and that's how you mitigate your damages.
Right, I would agree with that. And then going along with it, obviously some of these businesses are going to have a ramp up period again.
Right.
Some it's based on the state and saying you can or can't do it, but then just in general, some companies can't just open the next day and then be at 100% operations again. So there are some things we're going to say, well, maybe you should have hired people back earlier, knowing that they're not going to be working for you for a week or two. Just things we need to keep in mind, that there is a responsibility to mitigate, but how much mitigation is going to be up for debate.
Right, and just to remember, like, there's certain states that have already opened, but there's restrictions based on, you know, how they can operate. For example, a restaurant can have 25% capacity. So you're still going to have, yes, they're open, but you're still going to have losses occurring because you're still not back to your pre-event loss normal earnings. So, you know, there's still going to be some sort of losses, but you still must do everything you can according to what the orders are to mitigate your damages.
All right, we have a question. I have a client whose business was diminished by over 80% due to the virus. What impact will the virus have on the loss and value of the business as it is being sold at this time due to death by the owner due to the virus?
Gosh. That's a really good question, and I'm sure it's something that's going to be unfortunately more common than we would want it to be. But I'm going to say this is more of a business valuation question than a business interruption lost profits question, which NACFA has they're having webinars and have had webinars that would probably address this. I'm going to say this is more in the realm of business valuation, but doing business valuations, I would say that definitely is going to have a huge impact. And there are webinars on how we are integrating the COVID-19 effect on the business into our valuations, even though it wasn't known or knowable at the date of valuation. So I would kind of probably refer to the other webinars NACFA has on business valuations for a more in-depth answer on that.
Right, I would agree with that. I mean, that's really covered more in some of the other webinars, but based on the facts that are here, there also could still be an interruption loss that can be claimed, and also possibly a key person policy that they might have a claim that's on that side.
So for the person who asked this question, we do have at nacva.com, in the search box in the upper right-hand corner, if you type in faculty, that will pull up the instructors who teach for our various courses. Also, we have a directory, a member directory of credentialed members, where you can sort and find credentialed members by industry or area of specialization. We appreciate that. This was a great question, but it does fall a little bit more in the wheelhouse of more traditional business valuation. And we have other experts, faculty, and members who can help advise you on that question. All right, let's take another one. How do you address the requirement that the business suspension must be caused by direct physical loss of or damage to property at the insured premises?
Okay, this one, I'm sure Robert's going to have probably the same answer. I was excited about this one. Okay, so you have to really look at the language in the policy, and a lot of policies are going to say, yes, must be caused by direct physical loss to the damage of property or loss of use of the property. So that's where this kicks in, is not the physical direct loss, but loss of use of your property. And so a lot of claims are actually being rejected because say there's no physical damage, and they're just dropping it right there. They're not finishing the phrase in their own policy of, you know, loss, direct physical loss or loss of use of the property. So that's a super important phrase to look out for, and most policies do have that. So that's the one that's going to kick in the claim, is the loss of use of the property. Robert?
I would agree with that. And then the other part is something we covered in our, I guess, the other two sessions. There are some litigation cases that have happened over the last 10 years where there were contaminants or something in the building that didn't allow people to go back, and it was considered to be physical damage, even though the building itself wasn't damaged, just because of the fact that people couldn't go into the office or whatever it may be. We talked about the one case that was essentially, there was an issue with carpet installation and the odor that was in there because of it, and people couldn't go into the building, and that claim was allowed. And another one where there was kind of ammonia that was let go in the building, and again, people couldn't come in. There was no damage to the building itself, except that people couldn't go in for a while, and those cases were allowed to be paid out under this direct physical damage.
Right, and then there was a case of, I think it was in a chicken plant or some kind of meat plant where they actually had, I think it was E. coli or listeria, and that was a contamination of the services, of the surfaces. So they could not use, it was as classified as, property damage, just because they couldn't use that surface. And there was a distinction made between a virus and a bacteria. And so since it was a bacteria, it ended up being covered because they got down into the definition of what a virus, how long it lives, kind of the cells multiply, all those types of things. So it's really important to read each word of the policy, and it's going to come down to an interpretation of what's there and what's not there.
Right. That's going to.
And so you're probably going to see a lot of changes in business owners that are due to renew their insurance policies, or new business owners that are just going to get new policies. I'm sure that they've had teams working diligently and fervently on the language to make sure that anything from the COVID-19 will be excluded in all future renewals and in all future policies for sure.
Right, and that goes along with actually another question that just popped up, but same topic. A lot of the policies were changed, a few years back due to SARS, and they didn't have these type of exclusions for a while. So anyone that has newer policies, there may be some language in there that does disqualify it, but older policies definitely won't have that because that was something that was changed, but it's going to really depend on each policy.
That's a good point. And I'm glad you saw that question. Having SARS previously had an impact, not probably as wide as COVID, but they are certainly, insurance companies are certainly looking to address this kind of an issue going forward.
Right. I mean, that's the goal from that standpoint, is that if it's something that should be excluded as far as they're concerned, they're going to make sure that that is in the language and that it doesn't fall under what I would assume they consider a loophole.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think there was a question here regarding COVID-19. Sorry, Brian, I'm taking over your job here. But I just wanted to address this one right now. It was at the bottom. That COVID-19 is considered a type of SARS virus. Don't most policies have exclusion for SARS? Therefore, most claims will be denied. No, if it mentions just SARS, SARS is SARS. But I think insurance companies are probably learning that don't be specific in the type of virus that you name. Just, use the language that's going to cover any type of virus or pandemic or anything like that. So, it may say SARS in there, but COVID-19 isn't SARS. Right. So it's all going to come down to the interpretation, and probably going to end up in litigation. It'll be the court who decides.
Okay, another question here. I believe it's a two-part question from the same individual. In preparing a business valuation as of today, is it reasonable to assume that while there may be a downturn for 2 to 4 years, eventually things will return to economic levels expected prior to the pandemic? Alternatively, is it reasonable to opine that the economic outlook is so uncertain that any business valuation as of today, using the income approach, is speculative? Would this be a similar, more core business valuation issue, or do either of you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say definitely it's a business valuation question, but I think we can just kind of touch on it and say that, any business valuation that we do, it's not speculative. We have to go off data. We have to go off of national data, off of reputable sources, and methods that are court accepted methods and industry accepted methods of performing our business valuations. There's no way, if somebody did a business valuation in November of last year and it was a really high valuation because everything is going great, there's no way. We can never predict what is going to happen in the future. We do not have that crystal ball. So what we can just go on is the data that is available to us at the time. And, knowing that, yeah, there may be a downturn for 2 to 4 years, we just have to go with what is reasonable, what is defendable, and off the data that we have, and it's going to be really industry specific. So once again, yes, it is a business valuation question, but, as I said, in any business valuation, in any type of, whether it was last year or the year before, we can never predict the future. So just whatever you do, make sure that you use solid, reliable data that is industry accepted data and analysis methods.
Right, and just adding on to that, in terms of saying it's going to be down for 2 to 4 years, that probably is likely. I mean, it would be surprised if everything bounces back immediately. But there's so many articles and so much research that's out there that may not be such a stretch to say, I assumed this based on this research that I found. But make sure you have some support for whatever it is you're doing. Don't just put that in there and say, I think it could be a couple years. But if someone challenges you on it, you don't have a way to defend yourself.
Yeah, don't be speculative. That's the important thing is in business valuation, we never ever want to be speculative. So if you make an assumption or if you make some sort of conclusion, make sure that it's based on something that's defendable and data that's reliable.
On the NACVA.com COVID-19 page, there is 7 hours of recorded Q&A specific to business valuation. We held a panel discussion with about 5 of our leading business valuation faculty and board members. They addressed a wide range of topics from subsequent events to multiples to the report factors to standards, conclusions of value, a whole range of topics. If you were not able to participate on those live, the recordings are on nacva.com/COVID-19. They're free to view. They are not qualified for CPE credit, but there are a lot of recordings, including that 7 hours business valuation related content on the NACVA website. And we'll continue to produce content in the coming weeks. All right, another question. I have observed that there is a high level of mitigation, that is mitigation of death and bodily injury of customers, employees, etc. How do business interruption policies respond to this concept?
I personally would, factor this in and address it as I would in any other business interruption loss profit analysis. I think sometimes we overthink things and we kind of get in our own heads, just, oh my gosh, it's COVID-19, how can we do it? So if there's death and bodily injury of customers, employees, and it's something that, is the responsibility of that company, then I would just factor in as if it were any other type of disaster or a loss event that occurred. Robert? And
Yes,
depending on the policy, well, keeping within the language of the policy.
Exactly. I mean, that's really the only way you can approach that. There may be that higher level of mitigation due to those factors, but again, it's gonna be kind of a case by case, and you need to see why is that happening. And if you can't support it or can't justify it, that's where you're gonna make that adjustment.
This is a really good question. In general, how does the insurance industry calculate business interruption damages in this COVID-19 environment?
I'm not quite sure I'm understanding calculating the business interruption damages. All I can say is what I had said earlier at the beginning of this webinar is that they're gathering information from all of the insurance agencies on, the types of business interruption loss policies that people have, which ones have business interruption loss coverage, which ones have civil authority coverage, what are any kind of limits. So they're trying to gather data from all the insurance companies to kind of see their exposure. So I think that's what they're doing at this point to calculate their business interruption damages as a whole. I think on an individual, but I think they want to address that first, not address, but they want to get that information first before they start approving any claims to see, what kind of situation they're going to be in. Because once they start to approve claims, then it's just going to snowball after that. They have to start approving claims after that first one is approved. So at this juncture, I think they're just gathering a lot of data from about what policies are out there and what their exposure is. Robert?
Right, and then taking that next step is, once they are going to start approving them to the extent that it does happen, I don't think they're going to do anything substantially different than what historically has been done. The big issue relates to whether they're going to put something in place and say, when we calculate it, make sure this gets removed or excluded. But as of right now, I don't see any reason why they do anything different than what we typically would do in these type of cases in terms of the actual calculation process. But again, like Kerrie said, until this even approved that they're going to be admitting these claims, that theory their number is zero, other than just looking at everything that might be approved and what might not be.
Earlier, Robert, you discussed cases where the claims were not paid without physical damage. Can you provide some sense of what cities or what geographic areas were impacted by that?
So I can give you the cases here. I would have to go through the case in a bit more detail to give you exactly the city or location it was in and all that. But first case was the Essex Insurance Company versus Bloom South Flooring Company, and that was in the U.S. Court of Appeals. There's also the Gregory Packing Incorporated versus Travelers Property Casualty, and that was in the U.S. District Court for New Jersey.
Yeah, and there's the one that I had mentioned. Oh yeah, that I had mentioned regarding the meat one, which was the Landshire Fast Foods of Milwaukee, Inc. versus Employers Mutual Casualty Company. And I'm assuming that was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Making a little guess there.
For those of you who are members of the NACVA, you receive a Econassist subscription to key value data as part of your membership. By logging into your account at nacva.com, and then through the account portal, there is a link to Econassist subscription. It will push you over to the key value data website, where there is a federal and state case law database, which summarizes several cases, probably these, or will soon be summarized there, You can do case law research by specific type of valuation or litigation matter or state. It's searchable. You get a quick summary of those cases and also can view the entire case. So I just wanted to mention to those of you who are members of the association that you have at your fingertips, included with your membership, the ability to search a federal and state case law database of cases related to valuation and litigation. Next question, can force majeure include government shutdown? And is that a trigger for the insurance policy?
Oh, yes. Depending on your policy, if you have civil authority coverage, that will trigger that. Robert?
I mean, that's exactly it. It's policy by policy, but if civil authority is covered, that's essentially the same thing at that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What are you implying is that once the insurance industry gathers data, the answer may be conclusive against the policyholder? What are your thoughts? Oh, that must have been related to a previous topic we were on.
Yeah, I think I can answer this, and I just want to make it clear that I'm not trying to bash the insurance companies here. I'm just going with, what I've experienced and what has happened to date. When I call the insurance companies and they're not allowed to make a comment and I get hung up on, and that one single claim has been paid in the whole nation to date, that's not very, how can I say, business owner friendly, and that's not really, doing like they've done in the past, just process the claims and be fair about it. So I'm not saying they're going to be collusive against the policyholder, absolutely not. But I think they're trying to just kind of wait and see and get all the data before they start approving claims. I'm not saying that that's right or that's wrong and whatever it is. I'm just, the statements that I'm making here are based on what the facts are, is that not one claim has been paid and not one insurance company will make a comment or say anything. I tried to get, information on what can business owners do to make these claims more easy for you to process, to kind of give them a chance to have their perspective heard, which was just a no comment thing. So, I don't think they'll be collusive. I don't think they're going to do anything illegal, bad against the policyholder afterwards, but I think they're scared and they just want to gather all the data and get all the information before they put out, let their insurance agents know how to properly handle the claims. I think they're still deciding on how to handle the claims in such a large mass. So.
Right, and it's one of those things where they had that initial study that Kerrie mentioned earlier that thought that these damages were going to be huge and they couldn't afford it. They may go through all this analysis and realize it's not as bad as they thought, and maybe they're more willing to accept claims after that point, or vice versa, if they go to the litigation and start having to pay out, what's that damage look like for them? This is somewhat unrelated, but I look at it as the same thing with this payroll protection loan, and there was all that money that was put into it, and within a week or so it ran out. I realized there's a second run of funding, but that's their concern, is that once they open up the floodgates, how much damage is there?
Right. How do you factor this unique interest and growth rate environment into your analysis when calculating the present value of damages?
Robert, go ahead. You can take this one.
So, again, that's going to be kind of an industry and company specific type of situation. There are companies that are doing incredibly well right now. And I don't want to say it as they're taking advantage of the situation, because it's not. It's just they were able to change their model to better adapt to what's happening, whether they could change the services that they were providing, or maybe they are just somebody that people are now going to as the only, source. So it's hard to just say across the board, we're going to say flat 0% growth. But at the same time, there may be somebody that's now growing 10, 20%, a year. I realize that that's not necessarily going to mean the damages, but it's important to realize that not everything is going to be negative. And also that there are companies that are going to jump back to normal almost immediately after all this happens, and others that's going to take longer to get back to normal. So I know it's a bit of a non-answer, but ultimately you have to kind of look at the situation your company is in and determine what's the best way to project what's actually going to happen to that specific company. So, I mean, I wish I could give you a better answer there, but there isn't a kind of a blanket answer you can use for this situation.
Yeah, and it's really going to depend on the industry that the company is in, and how, if it's something, you know, when we look back to like say 2008, you know, a lot of people cut out the luxury items. So if you're looking at a spot, those are one of the things that are probably not going to have a huge growth rate over the next couple of years. But if you're looking at something like, you know, a company that does like home deliveries of groceries or, you know, things like that. Look at like Amazon, probably has exploded, you know, is doing well. So it's really going to depend on the type of industry and the growth that you're going to see, whether it's a necessity item business or something that's more of a luxury type of business. And also take into account, you know, given the knowledge that we have now of the types of businesses that get closed and what they've done, how they've mitigated their damages. Can they do some type of replacement income during these times? You know, just kind of keep in the back of your mind, hey, if this happens again, will this business be in a bad spot again, and will it be able to recover? So, you know, like, just keep those things in the back of your mind. There's just a lot of factors that go in, and it's really going to be industry specific.
In a plaintiff setting, how do you overcome the business would have been and was damaged by COVID, not the impairment event? How do you differentiate damages from COVID versus the impairment event?
So that's a tough one, and at the same time, though, we run into that pretty often because there's plenty of times where that same type of situation could occur. I know we're talking about the pandemic here, but it could be something where they had a breach, and you're talking about just a typical lost profit case. I'm just to use that as an example. Maybe there's a lost profit case where something was happening because someone stole some data or employees or whatever it was, and then there was a fire and burned down the building. And you have to differentiate what was the loss, what do they have done, if not for that second thing that happened. So it's really just looking back and saying, what were the projections? What was reasonable to be expected? And look at that first item that can be excluding the pandemic for right now. And then you try and look at the pandemic and say, okay, as a result of that, they couldn't operate, or they could do partial operations, or whatever it may be. And it's almost to an extent you're kind of backing into what the one side is to then subtract from the other. But it's only a matter of looking at what they've done in the past, what they were projecting, and looking at the support behind it, and trying to figure out one of those factors, and then you can kind of back into what the second one was.
Any comment to that, Kerrie?
No, I completely agree. I think it's, you know, we have to kind of just stop and think, okay, this is just, you know, an event. There could be two events that affect the business. So we have to treat COVID-19 as if it were, for example, a fire as a secondary thing. For example, in California, we have wildfires, and then for some reason, right after, we have a bunch of rain and then have floods and mudslides. So, you know, we get that nice combination. You know, you have to differentiate between, you know, what damages were caused by which event. So I think we have to, you know, really keep focused on COVID-19 as an event, and not just like let it overwhelm us and, you know, make us stumble and like think too much about it.
Right.
Yeah, that's the big issue, is that, yes, this is serious. It's something a lot of people haven't seen in their lifetimes, but in the end, it's not all that different from other things we see in this type of, you know, setting.
Mm-hmm. What realistically is the risk of litigation of bringing employees back to work, even when following whatever accepted standards will be, if they get sick later?
So, I mean, there's always going to be that litigation risk. That's why there is some legislation in Congress right now to try and limit that or show that it should have happened. Again, that tends to fall under more of another policy, or workers' comp, other policies that exist, and obviously other things you can have for your employees, more so than business interruption. But where it does relate tangentially is the fact that if you don't bring your employees back, you can't operate, then you have a larger interruption loss. So it's not exactly the same situation, but you can try and mitigate it as you can by following the policies, procedures that are expected to be there, whether it's everyone wears masks in the office, or you have to have a closed door, or you don't, you know, you still Skype and Zoom or whatever you have with your other, you know, staff members in the office right next to you. Do whatever you can to try and limit it and show that you did what you needed to. but that risk is going to be there. There's not really anything that's going to change that.
I agree. I think it needs to be treated as if it were any other situation. I mean, before COVID-19, there's always a risk in anything that you do. There's a risk in driving to work. There's a risk of, before this became a pandemic, of people going to work and being in a restaurant and we didn't know how bad it was going to be if you got sick. There's a risk during flu season. If you work at the restaurant, you get the flu. There's a risk in a hospital, higher risk of getting the flu and getting illnesses while you work in a hospital. So there's inherent risk in everything that we do. Just going to the grocery store, just going outside, there's always a risk of something. But as long as a business is, once they're told to open, and it's going to be the employee's individual choice. The business owner, to mitigate their losses, has to kind of follow the law. And as long as they're taking all measures and precautions, then, I think it would be really hard for, to have litigation brought against them if they went back to work and they got sick, because they could have gotten sick somewhere else, proving that you got sick while you were at your place of work. I think people are, it's just getting to be, people, I guess, are affected and very scared of getting it. And that's going to be the individual person's choice and decision to make if they want to go back into that environment or not. We have doctors and nurses that choose to work in the hospitals directly with the sick people, and that's their choice. And if somebody is really not comfortable, no matter what they're doing, whether working in a restaurant or retail or in an office, not to go to work because it's just causing them too much anxiety and stress, then that's their decision to do. But business owners, I'm sure, are going to take every measure possible, and probably even go above and beyond to keep their employees safe and to and their customers safe as well, because they want their business to continue to operate and they want customers to continue to come in and to feel safe.
Right. And again, this goes a little beyond what I think our scope is, but it's gonna definitely come up because there's a lot of people that are on that uninsured, employment insurance, all that right now, and that might stop if they decide not to come back to work if their job's offered to them again. So when that happens, that's going to impact the companies, and they have to decide what's the best way to keep them safe so I can get them to come back. Because a lot of people let their people go knowing that they were going to get more by being essentially laid off than getting paid through the company. So they're trying to do what's right for their employees. And if they think bringing them back is the best way to go, that's something they need to then figure out how to keep them safe. So they're
And as a business owner, I mean, we all know, you have your slip and falls, and that's what you have business insurance for. So there's always a risk of litigation, even without the COVID-19. But, and I know Robert mentioned something about, things in legislation. And I know business owners want to have this blanket immunity if workers come back. But, then I think we're going to be stepping on some constitutional rights at that point. But that's more of a legal issue question. I don't see the government being able to give immunity to all businesses for something like that, but who knows, we'll see. But just I said, there's always a risk of litigation even in normal times.
Are public adjuster fees reimbursable?
Robert.
I would say not that I've usually seen. I don't know if you've seen anything different.
No, not that I've seen, unless there's something specific, if it went to litigation and then you had to go through all this extra stuff maybe to get it, but not in a normal.
It's usually more of like a legal fee award. If you're talking about, but usually I don't see it.
I also want to make a point to remind our attendees that this program is not providing legal advice, and that many of these questions, particularly about what businesses need to do, they may differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We're doing our best to provide good answers and good perspective, but you do need to seek actual legal advice and in compliance with the jurisdictions with where they're be appropriate. So just wanted to make that clear comment for everyone as well. Have you seen one policy that covers viruses and/or civil action?
So I think a lot of that was more pre-SARS. where a lot of the policies were open-ended for that. I mean, the newer policies typically do exclude viruses or try and put something in there that just says that it's not going to cover, X, X, and X, whatever it may be. So no, I haven't seen many that specifically say we will cover viruses, but I think that's a lot of the older policies that were that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Here's good.
I haven't said anything on that. Yeah, and just to reiterate what Brien said, even though we're talking about some of the things with responsibilities of companies, it's absolutely important to remember that every state is different, every jurisdiction is different, and just to be aware of where you live, what's going on. Your state may have lifted certain things. There may be so many unique factors involved. So definitely we're not trying to give anybody legal advice. Anything that has to do with a legal conclusion, definitely seek legal counsel on. Anything we're saying is just, kind of based on what we have experienced. So it's not telling you this is the law, that is the law. So
Good perspective, but there's actual legal advice to be sought after to seek based where you live in the jurisdictions. All right, this is a good question, so give me a minute to get through it. The whole thing is pretty good. It's pretty long. Suppose a business, company A, working on a project depends in major part on a subcontractor. The subcontractor goes out of business because it cannot collect its other receivables due to its various customers being impacted by the pandemic. Now company A cannot complete its project due to the loss of the subcontractor. Company A now has its business interrupted and has business interruption insurance. Will its insurance refuse to cover the claim because of the subcontractor going out of business was the impact of the pandemic on its clients?
So that's actually a really good question. And I know Kerrie has a lot of information on that, but I'll take a stab at it first here. But a lot of times you are covered if you have the insurance, if it's based on a kind of a contingent, another subcontractor, supplier, whatever it may be. There's some leader coverage that might cover you a little bit depending on the situation. So yes, it usually would be covered. The issue you're running into here is the same thing we talked about before, is whether they're going to try and deny things based on COVID for the moment and say you're not covered, but because of the pandemic. But generally, if your supplier goes out and causes an interruption in your process, then yes, that typically would be covered if you have the right policy language.
okay, Robert, thank you for answering. Yes,
No,
Robert hit the nail on the head there. If it's in your policy where you have contingent coverage, that would be the perfect example of something that would be triggered, a different clause that would be triggered in your policy to trigger coverage. So it wouldn't be something relating to your business closing. It would just be contingent business interruption. So, and once again, all is the policy language, and all goes down to what the insurance companies decide how they want to handle those claims.
Mm-hmm. There's another question. I'm curious how you might handle lost profits cases that were in process before COVID-19 to segregate the damages from the alleged pre-COVID-19 breach versus damages as a result of COVID-19. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's similar to what we were talking about before. Interestingly, I have a case, assuming courts open up, I have a trial and it's about the same thing in about a month. So it's just one of those things where you have to look at what was expected, what do you think is going to happen, and you're going to have to revise it. I mean, if you were expecting significant profits the first 4 months, 5 months of the year, and they're now shut down or they're doing some portion, you just need to make those adjustments. It's just not a perfect, not a perfect situation, but you do your best to identify what's the initial cause, what's the loss, and then how much is allocated due to COVID versus, what the defendant is really responsible for.
I agree, and it's just one thing that's easier to do in those types of cases and in business valuation, because business valuation is what's known and knowable at the date, where luckily, when you're doing like but-for losses and things like that, calculation damages such as those, you can add in like, you know, the current economic conditions. So definitely I would keep it updated because that's the actual situation. And then, as I said before, take into account the type of industry it's in, what's projected to happen in the next 6, 12, 18 months, how the industry will be affected, and also go down and start, you know, nationally, worldwide economy, national economy, regional economy, and then the local economy. I would just, you know, really look at all those different, you know, kind of go start big and go down to see how it's going to affect the damages in that case.
Another question, are there errors and omissions coverage that could perform with or without litigation when determined that COVID-19 loss is not covered?
I don't know if that would be relevant, but even if it is, I think that's one of those ones that if the insurance industry generally isn't trying to cover COVID for that reason, they're probably not going to cover it on the E&O. What do you think, Kerrie?
Yeah, I would, when I think of errors and omissions, it's more, I think of, oops, I made a mistake, or, you know, to cover something that I've done wrong. I would think it would be really a tough sell, especially if business law, interruption loss policies aren't covering those claims tailored specifically to the virus. So, but once again, I would look through the policy, and, you know, if you feel you have a valid claim and you want to know, just contact an attorney and they can look through the policy and probably give you a more definitive answer.
Okay, we have a question that must have resulted as a prior, based on your prior comments. Would the project performance bond assist with payout, given that example? So perhaps how, or do you know how the project performance bond factors into these types of engagements?
So I'm assuming that was going back to the example we said where the supplier went under and then they couldn't complete their project. And there is a possibility, again, you have to look at the bond and what it covers and how it covers it. And whether you're talking about, is it just truly a cost issue, or was that supplier a sole source and you can't do the work at all? So there may be a couple different impacts in terms of what the damage is and what's the operations of the company. Because if you just can't finish the project at all, that's a slightly different loss than you're just talking about. It cost you an extra $100,000 to go to a different supplier.
No, I agree. It's going to depend on what role that supplier played in your chain, if there's replacement companies, replacement products, and, you know, if it's something that you can do quickly, not quickly, you know, it may change how you calculate the damages. There might still be damages or maybe not. So it's going to depend on each case.
Okay. Businesses that were required to close may not be able to fulfill their contractual obligations. A manufacturer may not be able to produce and ship on time, for example. Any thoughts on litigation over this type of breach?
So, go ahead, Kerrie.
I was going to say, this is going to come down more to like a legal answer, but I would definitely say it's going to be more of a legal answer, but it's something I would discuss with an attorney. And it's going to be something that probably would have to be answered by the courts in the end.
Right. I mean, we can't give an answer as to whether or not it's legitimate, but I would be surprised if I didn't see some of those cases arise.
Oh, definitely.
Okay. I'm just going to read over a couple of these. I am also a business broker, or I'm a business broker. How do you see COVID-19 affecting business sales and new buyers coming into the new market? And how do you approach the valuation of the business if transactions do happen? Again, this is probably a more business valuation specific question.
Yeah, I'm gonna say definitely if you want a more in-depth business valuation answer, as Brien said, there's like 7 hours of Q&A webinars that are free to watch. I would say, I'll probably answer the same way I did before, is yes, it's going to be factored in. And business values are most likely, depending on the industry. It's really going to be industry dependent and business specific on if the value is going to be even higher or lower of a business during these times.
Right. And the other issue in terms of being a broker and are there companies available to sell, some industries are going to be more saleable than others. Some people are going to be distressed companies that come up for sale because they're either going to go under or you can get a deal and just sell it off to somebody. There's others that might be doing better and ready to sell. Or those people that said, I was going to sell 10 years from now, but I just don't know if I have the energy to build this company back up. I'm just going to sell it now. So I don't think that that's an industry that's just going to disappear for 2 or 3 years while everything recovers. But at the same time, it might be a different set of companies.
Yeah, because you could have, say, an industry, something like we're here on Zoom. You're going to have maybe more, you're going to start seeing maybe more kind of platforms come out like this. And that could be an amazing industry to get into as people are doing more things virtually. So that might be an industry that's really going to be exploding in the future and be worth a lot in the future. Or something streaming, TV streaming stuff, things that are going to be more virtual. There may be some industries that are going to be profitable in the future, and then other industries that we may see on the decline. So just because, the economy is really bad and a lot of businesses are affected and even closing for good, but there are industries, especially as a business broker, you're going to deal in a lot of different types of industries. There will be some industries that are going to be flourishing during these times and in the future.
Right, and kind of adding on to that, you have those some companies that are doing incredibly well, and then you also have really low interest rates. So those companies that are doing well might see an opportunity to kind of expand into other areas while they can borrow and acquire other companies at a discount.
Mm-hmm. How do you update a lost profits report that was issued, but a trial date has not been set to reflect the COVID impact?
I think that's going to depend on the attorney. I've had some cases already where they say just update it as best you can with what you know now. And others have said just hold on, and as soon as we have a trial date, then you'll update it so you don't have to do it twice. I think it really depends if they're trying to settle or not, as to whether they want to update it right away or if they're just going to want you to wait and find out when the trial is and then have it done 2-3 months ahead of time.
Yep, I say the same thing as Robert. It's going to depend on, there's a lot of parties in litigation right now that have been waiting. Their court dates were really coming up really soon. And now that they've seen, the uncertainty in the economic future, really want to just settle and be done and not take their chances in court in the future and see what's going to happen. So there's, in that case, yes, they may ask you to update your report now because the parties really want to settle. Or if they really are firm on going to litigation or going to trial, as Robert said, they don't want you to update it twice. There's no sense in that. So to wait, before trial to update it with the information that we have at that time.
Does bacteria and fungi exceptions necessarily also exclude viruses in these claims? You were saying earlier it's kind of SARS was different than COVID and how it multiplies. Is that kind of specific language or generally specific language in these insurance policies as to this level of definition?
Yeah, this is going to be something, this is going to be really policy specific, but more if it, says, oh, we exclude bacteria and fungi, it's going to come to the definition of what is bacteria. Bacteria, I believe, is something that can reproduce, and viruses are different than bacteria. So if there's not, a specific exclusion maybe for viruses or pandemics, then I would say it's worth filing a claim. If you're denied, then consult an attorney. I can't tell you, yes, if it just says bacteria and fungi, yes, you have a valid claim. It's really going to depend. I would say a virus is different than bacteria. A virus is different than fungus. So I would definitely, pursue that and seek legal advice if it does get denied. But also, I said there's some insurance companies that are really good and have like ironclad policies that literally give you a dictionary of vocabulary of what's excluded. So you have to really look at what's excluded. And, you're going to get those that have pages of just words. And so then you're probably not going to get it in. But if it doesn't say, you know, really specific viruses and a whole bunch of things, I would definitely seek legal advice or, you know, submit the claim.
Right. I mean, the only thing I would add on to that is that you almost might have to see what the court system says, because typically you would look at the insurance company and say, what can we negotiate or figure out? But if it's going to go to the court system, the judge may look at everything that's going on and just make a ruling that maybe isn't as similar to what you would normally see, and that becomes the new normal when it comes to these claims.
All right, I understand various states are considering legislation which requires insurance companies to insure business interruption losses due to the coronavirus. What's the consensus around whether that is likely to happen? And if so, do you have a sense of what states may lead the way with this?
Actually, I do kind of have an opinion on this, and that's, and I've heard the same thing, that, you know, there are things in legislation right now trying to get passed to do that, but then you're stepping into constitutional rights area. And I think there's going to be too much conflict between making states do something that could be, or have or insurance companies do something that's in direct conflict with their policies. So I think that's going to be a real issue. It's a great idea, but I think it's just going to meet with too much resistance and too much, I don't see it going through, because it would be like saying, you know, pay them, you must pay the policyholder if they file a claim, but what if they had exclusions in their policies? That's not really fair to the insurance companies. So you're going to ask them to cover people that didn't really even have coverage. So I see some issues with that.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll see what happens with it. I just don't recall if it was New York or New Jersey was one of the first trying to have that go through. But we don't know if it's going to happen. I mean, it's something that's being discussed. But I agree with Kerrie. I don't think it's as likely, because you are forcing someone to do something that they might not be able to do. Or again, I hate to use the word fair, because things aren't always fair, but it may be something where they don't have the right policy and you're saying they're going to get paid no matter what, just as a way to take it out of kind of the private pockets versus, you know, the government bailout type of situation. So who knows what's going to happen with it. But as of right now, I don't think anything's passed.
Yeah, nothing has passed so far. And as I said, especially it's gonna, I can't see it passing because, I mean, I'm not saying what, but if a policyholder doesn't have that coverage and it has an exclusion, then it would basically be telling the insurance company you have to pay them anyway, which wouldn't be fair to the insurance company. So we'll see.
Are your fees to prepare a business interruption claim an extra expense under the business interruption claim?
Go ahead, Robert.
I mean, I think
Extra expense?
yeah, I mean, I guess in theory you could probably say that it is, but I mean, usually I don't look at that as part of the expense when I'm putting that calculation together.
No, I don't include it in my extra expenses as well. Of course, a lot of times if it goes to litigation, they may ask for our fees back, expert fees back, but it's not included in the calculation. No, extra fees maybe now, because they may have, because we always tell our clients, you know, make sure that you keep your normal accounting procedures separate from your accounting for items that are a result of the loss event. So they may have extra accounting fees, but those wouldn't be ours.
Right. I mean, because extra expense typically relates to expenses you've incurred to get back to operations faster. And you talk about the interruption loss and the cost to prepare the claim. That's usually more of an after the fact type of situation, or at least not related to them operating sooner. So I wouldn't usually categorize it on that end.
Okay, we've got a question. The SBA EIDL loan, is it mitigating a business interruption loss? If so, I'm not sure the loss goes away unless the loan is forgiven. What are your thoughts on that?
That's exactly it. Same with the payroll protection loan. If it's just a loan and you have to pay it back, then that's still a loss. If it gets forgiven and you don't have to pay it at all, then that should be mitigation.
I second that.
Okay. Let's see, we've got some questions here. What if I performed evaluation as of the end of 2018 for a partner who was pushed out of his business and COVID has increased the sale of a novel product which was market tested and approved prior to his removal? Would an amended appraisal be accepted? Sounds to me like that's another pretty business valuations, more specific topic.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of fall into litigation potentially when you're talking about more of a buyout situation. And I mean, Kerrie, I'll let you kind of get to this, but I think it really depends on what the valuation date was. And if it says that you have to have it as of the day you left or not.
Yeah, I would say this is definitely a business valuation question, but just I keep saying, keep in mind, your business valuation is going to be on what was known or knowable as of the date of the valuation. So it's going to depend on, I'm assuming your valuation was performed, around reading this, it looks like this happened after your business valuation date. So I would speak to counsel about that, but usually it's known or what is knowable as of the date of valuation.
Okay. What are your thoughts on project and contract remediation clauses? They allow the ability to allow the project owner the ability to mitigate, even in circumstances such as COVID. Project and contract remediation clauses.
I think that's great if companies are able to settle up between themselves and they're both receptive to doing that and they feel that that's the best route for them to take, then I think that's a great solution if both parties are fine doing that.
I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, again, that's kind of case by case, and if they can do it, that's great. Yeah. Kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, is if there would be litigation between parties and if that'd be accepted or not. I mean, if they do this, it's probably the better option.
Mm-hmm. How do you suggest getting information as to reasons for denials on claims as a way to shape new claims?
We can only go with what we know. I mean, we're just, as I said, we're just trying to keep this really related to just COVID-19 claims. So based on what we know has been the reasons for denial, it's all has to do with, you did the main reason that we're finding that the claims are being denied is because you don't have damage to your property. You don't have a loss of your property, but you have a loss of use of your property. And that's the distinction that needs to be made. So what can we do differently to make our claims stronger? Well, I think knowing the policy language is really important and adding that into the report. But even if, and getting legal counsel involved if needed. But I think at this point, there's nothing specific, no magic answer that, okay, if you put this in, your claim is going to get approved. I don't think anything is going to happen until the insurance industry decides how they're going to handle this whole situation and the claims as a whole.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I generally do think it would be important to take a look and see why things were denied, especially if you're going to have 10, 20 more of the same type of engagement. So that way you can alter what you're doing to make sure it doesn't get denied. But like I said, in this situation, there's just too many unknowns. And if they're going to be denying everything for the moment, there's really nothing you can do in terms of changing the way you prepare to your claim.
Do you think that insurance companies will challenge the businesses by suggesting they could have mitigated in ways they did not consider? Not all businesses can retool and change operations to mitigate in every conceivable way. What are your thoughts on that?
I think once we get to the point where they're actually really processing the claims, and I think that's a factor that comes in, that can come in any claim. So it's going to depend on the type of industry and what the others in the industry were doing to mitigate their claims, and then looking at, could your specific business have done those same things to mitigate their claims, and to justify maybe why they didn't, or they did, or whatever. I think that's going to be an individual case-by-case basis.
Right, I would agree there. It's just there's no way to know what's going to happen with a specific company right now, but I seriously doubt that the insurance companies wouldn't challenge the mitigation. There's no reason why they would just accept the claim and say, okay, so you're damaged because you couldn't open, or because you couldn't do whatever it was you tried to do. If they do know of other companies that were in similar industries and found ways to mitigate their losses, they're probably going to expect other companies to do the same.
Hmm. We have a comment, I believe it relates to a prior discussion point, with local government violating insurance contracts. Do you recall how to tie back to that?
So
Yeah.
can local, sorry, I'll figure out how to read the questions. Do we have it? Can local government violate insurance contracts? Kerrie, did you want to?
And once again, I'm going to say that that's definitely a legal question with the legal answer. I think that's something that's, as you said, there's the legislation that is being looked at right now, and I believe it's New York and New Jersey, that directly addresses that issue. Can try and pass something that would violate the insurance contract. So I would say there is no answer right now, but that definitely would be a legal question. But there is no answer at this moment. It's still being decided.
Right, and the other issue is, even if they do pass it, if it gets challenged by the insurance industry, it doesn't mean that it's going to then hold up.
Yeah.
I have a question here about, with no comp data per se, what might the trier of fact find reasonable in terms of a discount rate, now taking into COVID into account?
I'm assuming it's talking about business valuations. When you're talking about a discount rate. So I'm gonna, without more information, I wouldn't know how to answer that without more information to exactly what it's pertaining to. Unless, Robert, you can read more.
I agree. I mean, it probably is more on the valuation side. I mean, I know we have a lot of sessions about it, so I'll kind of defer to those, but I would expect that there would be some adjustment to the discount rate for the additional risk, just making sure that's not double counting whatever was done to the earnings stream.
Mm-hmm. So we haven't had any questions, new ones submitted, and in order to issue CPE credit, we need to go 10 more minutes, 100 minutes to issue two hours of CPE credit in compliance with the North American State Board of Accountancy. So if you have some questions, please pop those into the Q&A box. Kerrie, Robert, we've covered a wide range of issues. Maybe if you could spend a few minutes thinking forward. You've been in the forefront and in this issue with us for quite a while, to sort of project what we might see in the next coming weeks. There's some more programs coming out through the government. We're still waiting for insurance companies to respond to claims. We're kind of in this in-between pattern, but certainly you might have some perspective as to what we might see in these coming weeks. We do, here, great questions. Thank you all. All we need to do is ask you to send questions, and here they come. Have either of you been asked to prepare a business income loss claim as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yes. I've had a couple attorneys reach out, and also business owners reach out and ask us to put something together, or at least understand how we're going to approach it. I haven't gone through, preparing it and sending anything out at this point, but that's, yes. those are now coming in. Because I think rush was everybody trying to get into those government assistance loans. And now I think the next step, people are starting to look at their business insurance.
Yeah. And you're in Maryland, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Kerrie, you're in Texas.
No, I'm in California.
Oh, California.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I've had some come in as well, but directly from the business owners themselves. So they're just kind of still in process and waiting to be submitted to get some more information and see where things are kind of heading first.
All right. What are publicly available sources that practitioners can go look to in finding out how insurance claims relating to COVID are likely to proceed? Any resources you could recommend for our audience?
That's really going to depend on what information you really want to know. Do you want to know on what's happening in the insurance industry and where they're at and how they're addressing the claims? I would say, go to the National Association of Insurance Companies. They probably have some great information on what they're doing from their perspective and how they're handling the claims, where they're at, and where their thinking is at on either approving or denying them. That's, say, the resource that's probably available to everybody. Speak with associations, maybe in the field or the industry that you're looking at that you want to know about. They'll have some information too. So it's like an architectural firm, maybe like a regional or national architectural association is going to have some information on how these things are being handled and what their members are, the issues the members are coming up against and filing their claims.
Right. I mean, that's really the best thing. And honestly, I don't know exactly where they're going with the question in terms of what type of information, but looking at the industry that you're dealing with and what's available, as well as, through NACVA, there's a couple other areas where there's gonna be some resources. I know we had a 5-day session previously that went over how to do these claims. So if you're just trying to get into the industry, that might be a good way to go as well.
Through our partnership with Key Value Data, they have a research analyst which you can hire by hour to specifically customize a research report for you. By working with her, she can identify the specific scope and industries and data, as well as how broad a type of research request you're needing. I'm with the NACVA. My email is Brien with an E, J1 @nacva.com. And if you are looking for very specialized and specific research, I'd be happy to connect you with Patricia Braden with Key Value Data to work on those specific kinds of research projects for you. We do have someone who can support that. All right, another good question. Have you seen coverage for communicable disease coverage? Do you think it would cover COVID-19?
I haven't specifically seen that, but I assume if it's in there, then that would definitely cover. I'm not trying to make a legal conclusion, but that's something that's what we are dealing with here. So I would assume that would cover it.
Yeah, I haven't seen those specific words in a policy, communicable disease. But if it were in there, I think it might fit the definition. I think it's definitely worth submitting the claim and using that in your report to state, but as again, that can be a legal definition, legal conclusion, legal definition, but I would say definitely it's a good basis to submit a claim.
Do you see an advantage to businesses submitting claims now as opposed to waiting for either the damage period to end or more clarity from the courts?
I would say submit your claim right away. I think that's important, because submitting your claim, you don't have to submit your damages at the time you submit your claim. You just file a claim. You don't have to file all the analysis with it. So open it up, file your claim so that's open, because you want to be careful that you don't wait too long if there's a time limit on the amount of time from when the lost event occurred to the date when you can file. So if there's a 3-month, limitation or whatever, just be aware of that in your insurance policy to make sure that you don't go past if there's any kind of time limit to file your claim. You have nothing to lose on filing it right away.
Right. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I get the point of the question is to say, if they're just going to deny it right away, are you better off to send something in a few months once they know they have to pay, if that's the case. But in terms of filing, you're better off to file now, because my biggest concern would be if you have to file a claim within 60 days or 90 days of the incident or whatever it may be. I don't want you to get denied because you just didn't file soon enough.
If a company has been shut down because of the government's response to COVID-19, decides to keep its employees on payroll to avoid losing them, is that likely to be viewed as a continuing cost that is reasonable, or will the insurer more likely say those costs should have been discontinued and therefore deducted from the business interruption claim?
I'm going to say, I think this, if you look at this as if it were any other type of loss, say a fire, I don't really see too often where an employer will continue to pay his employees that aren't working to avoid losing them for an extended period of time. I think we're seeing that employees are being paid not to lose them because people are getting the payroll protection plan loans or anticipating on getting those loans. I think that it would be very good, point to make, a valid claim to make for insurance companies, saying you paid people and they weren't doing any work. That's a cost that could have been avoided. So, Robert, go ahead. I see that you want to ask this question.
No, you're right. I mean, I would agree with all of that. The only thing I would, no, sorry. I was just going to clear it out when we're done. But I was only going to add to what you had said and just say, for those companies where there may be a ramp up and they don't think they can get those employees back or operate again, that may be a situation where they think it's reasonable to keep paying them. It's something that you see, I would say, in the normal industry, and nothing to do with this type of situation here, but you see that a lot in government contracting, where there's such a high demand for those employees. You're going to pay them even when you don't have work because you can't find some people to do that work going forward. Similar thing here. If you were worried about not being able to get employees back or anyone to come work for you, I think that may be a situation where insurance companies might be willing to accept that expense. But I think generally Kerrie's right that in every other situation, if there's a fire or whatever else, you're typically not going to be paying those employees.
Yeah, and I'm thinking more on the businesses like restaurants and things like that, but definitely absolutely what Robert said. If you're talking about people that are key people in the company and people that are not easily replaceable, that have something unique to contribute to the company, that would be a valid reason to continue to paying them, because it would cost more to hire somebody new, train them, and just the whole process.
Have you found any specific data to separate COVID impacts from non-COVID impacts?
I don't think there's any specific data. I mean, the only thing you really can look at if you're trying to go to an empirical source is maybe look at industry data to say this is what the industry was expected to do. If you say the industry was expected to grow at 2 or 3% or 5% or whatever it was, and now you can see it's going to be flat, maybe that's something you can do. But I don't think it's so much there's going to be a specific source you're going to. It's going to be more of a company by company situation.
Yeah, and I say going to the same sources that we normally go to, and just looking at data that was pre-COVID, and then looking at the same economic data for after. A lot of us use the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics for economic data, and that's a great resource because you can go back and look at previous dates. It's a really great resource, and so that's what I would do. Is I would say, if I was going to have a data source looking at data, that would be probably the source that I would probably use. But there's no specific source that's come up new to say, hey, we have pre-COVID and COVID data tailored to that.
Are there any documents you would request other than the usual financial records in order to support your calculations?
I would probably, other than I mean, a lot of times, we ask for the financial documents and forecasts and all of that type of data, tax returns. I would probably add in there things on, types of programs maybe they've applied for, monies that they've gotten, things, things, the steps that they've taken. Maybe they're doing replacement revenue. For example, like Bacardi is making hand sanitizer. So you might have to get different types of financial documents and different types of data that normally. So I don't know if it's more than just getting financial statements, but I would make sure that you include all the different unique types of data and financial inputs and outputs that have come as a result of COVID-19.
Right, I would have to agree with that. I mean, there's not really new data, but outside of things like what Kerrie mentioned, I think the most important being, what programs did they apply for, because those are going to be really obvious ones that everybody's going to look for. There was a question similar to that in terms of the payroll protection program and how do you handle it. I mean, that's going to be really important because that's something that you would just take right off of the bottom line of the damage if it was forgiven. So that's why you really need to make sure you're asking for that type of documentation. In terms of the other documents that exist, I think what Kerrie mentioned is right on.
What exactly is meant by separate accounting for COVID-19 expenses? COVID-19 expenses might take the form of an increase in some category of routine expenses, which could be broken down into sub-accounts with a journal entry. Alternatively, should a separate ledger be opened exclusively for COVID expenses?
I don't think a separate ledger needs to be there. I think that's more of an issue of you want to be able to identify it. It's not like we're saying you have to do anything different with your company in terms of keeping track of things. You just want to be able to have the analyst that's there. They can say, this was COVID, this is non-COVID, instead of them trying to parse that out themselves.
Yeah, it could just be setting up something like, payroll expense, and you have payroll expense / COVID. And just making sure that it's really easily identifiable.
Okay. Would an insurance firm, like other business, be able to claim losses under COVID? Let's say the SBA programs and SOP. If this is the case, why wouldn't they pay out to their clients? So would an insurance firm be able to claim losses under COVID?
I mean, if this is insurance, I mean, I'm not sure what type of insurance company, but if it's like a business like any other business and they've suffered losses as a result due to COVID, I would say it would be treated like any other business. I wouldn't treat it any differently. I'm not sure if this is the case. Why wouldn't they pay out to their clients? I'm not quite sure. I think I'm understanding what is being asked.
Right. There's two parts to that question. If you're talking about can the company get some government assistance to continue operating, that's one thing. Yes, I agree. They'd have covered just like any other company. If you're talking about are they going to get reimbursed for any payouts that they make, I just don't think that's going to be the case.
If my policy does not include any endorsements, or my broker did not notify me of any endorsements, what other areas of the policy should I study related to COVID-19 coverage? Disclosure statements?
So I think those are yes. I mean, those are definitely areas, disclosure statements. You're going to want to look at, what it has in there in terms of the civil authority, whether there's any other leader policy, is there any other things in there that where you can have sort of contingent loss. So you want to see everything that could potentially lead to some other loss that's covered. I mean, it depends. Sometimes there are going to be the endorsements, sometimes there aren't, but there may still be something in the policy that explains what you have as a loss that might still be covered.
Yeah, and any exclusions as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Do you think it is premature to start preparing loss claims arising from COVID, particularly when there could be another spike?
No, as I said, you have to be really careful that if your policy states that you have X amount of days to file a claim from the date of the loss, you want to make sure that you respect that. And having another spike, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of this webinar, is, we don't know the answer to it. If there's another spike in COVID-19, is it going to be part of your original claim? Is it going to be part of a new claim? We don't know. This has never happened before. So we, as people that prepare these claims, don't know. The insurance industry doesn't know. And even, the legal profession is just really unclear on how this is going to go. We don't know how to handle this. So no, it's not premature to put in a claim, because I said you want to make sure that you respect the time limits that you have to file a claim. And we have, once we get to, and if there is an issue or the events where we have another, spike and things are closed again, then, we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. We've got so many, we got to cross this bridge first, somebody put it to me the other day, is like, that bridge that's going to be like the dinosaur that's standing behind the lion that you have to first defend yourself and get through defending yourself from the lion before you can even think about going to the dinosaur behind that lion. So first I have to get through this before we can start thinking about, oh my gosh, what if this happens again? So we have to really just take one step at a time. And as I said, just be aware of any time limitations on filing a claim.
Exactly. And so I think you're covered either way if you file now, because you don't necessarily need to give a dollar amount of your damage at the moment. So you're either covered for the first one if it's all one, and if it's two, then you're going to be filing a second claim anyway.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. In a situation where the impact is still going on, what is considered the date of the incident from which the filing deadline runs?
That would usually just be when the shutdown was ordered.
And it's going to be state by state, or it can even go down to even county by county. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, even where I am now in Maryland, and I'm sure a lot of places are that way, the various counties are opening at different times. So where the company is, that could be impacted.
Do you envisage an increase in professional negligence claims being brought against insurance brokers as a result of inappropriate policies being sold to businesses?
Well, I'll tell you, and we are a very litigious nation. So I think, and especially, and I don't mean that in a negative way, because there's a lot of valid reasons to do that. But, and especially when you have an economic situation or an economic event that, so many people have lost their jobs, have lost their income, there tends to be a spike in litigation when the economy is really down at its lowest, because that's when, people take advantage of people, or when people file claims, not necessarily for good reasons, because they need money. So definitely in this case, do I see an increase in the amount of claims? I would think, in my opinion, yes, for many reasons. Whether they're valid or not, that's not for me to decide, but I think there will be more claims. Will be claims on that.
Right. I mean, in that case, what's the question? I mean, I could easily see people trying to bring those claims, again, whether they be valid or not. Who knows? I mean, I don't think anybody could have foreseen all of this.
Right. How would you treat the receipt and subsequent forgiveness or repayment of PPP monies in your calculation of a business interruption claim?
It just comes right off the damage amount if it was forgiven.
Yeah, it's a mitigation, so it doesn't come off the loss amount.
What is the business is exempt from shutdown, or what if the business is exempt from shutdown because it was an essential business, but it lost sales?
Okay, I'm gonna take this one first, Robert, then you can. So I was actually just talking with somebody about this the other day, and there's going to be situations where this actually is going to occur, and you're going to see this, and I think I spoke with this about you yesterday, Robert, was, say for example, a dentist, an orthodontist, a surgeon, or like a plastic surgeon. So these are things that are deemed essential businesses, so they weren't shut down, okay, because they're doctors, but they're not able to operate because maybe they're elective surgeries, or people aren't allowed to go in for dental cleanings and stuff like that. So that's going to be one of the situations where they weren't shut down because the doctors are deemed an essential service, but they're going to have losses. They may have things like dental emergencies. Say somebody, needs a root canal. They have, impacted windows. There are things that there's going to be emergencies where they need to work, and they will, but they weren't shut down because they're doctors and they were considered an essential service, and they are going to have a loss of business. So this is definitely happening. And, this is probably going to be something that ends up in litigation, but it is a situation that there are going to be claims for that. And that's an example of one.
Exactly. And I guess a different example, because what you're talking about is potential just lost revenue in general. I know we used this example in the first session that an accounting firm like us, some of it's deferred revenue. And you're still going to have it down the road, but it might be outside the loss period. Or same thing, people just in a litigation setting settle the case. You lost the trial revenue. But at the same time, there may be additional tax work due to all this, or helping clients with their loans and whatnot. So the key thing is that there may be that lost revenue, but you also have to be careful to make sure there wasn't an increase in revenue due to COVID as well.
Going back to a prior comment or topic, when you say the time of shutdown, do you mean the shelter-in-place orders? And would considering local, city, county, state, or national stay-at-home orders? What if a business activity was impacted prior to official shutdown orders?
So I think shutdown and shelter-in-place, to an extent, are two different things. And it's going to impact every company differently, because some companies were shut down before the shelter-in-place order was in place. So it just depends on the company you're dealing with. And I think it really is going to come down to what was the major impact on that company.
I would say it's when you were deprived of the use of your property business, that gave you the loss of use of your property, whether it was from the stay-at-home or from the time of shutdown. As Robert said, it's going to depend on what industry you're in, what business you have. But the date I would take is when you had the loss of the use of your property, business property.
All right. As we're coming to the hour, or at the conclusion of our time, in closing, are there any comments or topics or helpful perspectives that you haven't been addressed so far?
Robert?
I covered a lot.
That's all right. So I think that, again, is just make sure that you're flexible and keeping it up to date on everything that's changing. See what's happening with the insurance industry, because I think you're going to see a flood of these once that first payout happens. And it may be something where a lot of clients are waiting to see what happens. And I think that's why it's going to be really important for you to reach out to your clients. I know everybody's a little bit different here, whether you're in a traditional litigation valuation or in an accounting firm that has a litigation valuation. But for example, if you have an accounting firm attached to you, maybe it's worth reaching out to all of your clients and letting them know, hey, if you think you have a loss here, you may be worth filing. And that might be a good start for this. Just keep an eye out for what's the information that's out there in your opportunities, because you don't know what's going to come to you, and you may have to kind of reach out to assist people, because there is so much information and misinformation that's out there right now. You just want to make sure that you can stay up to date yourself, but also keep your potential clients up to date.
So
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kerrie, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's probably the most important thing to do is stay up to date on what's going on, and encourage all your clients and business owners to file their claims, just so they don't miss any kind of time limitations. And just be aware that all claims are being denied at the moment. As I said, I don't know of any that have been approved, and to not take that as an end all, be all, end all. And to just get information out there and to pass along to others, because I know a lot of business owners are being told, no, we don't cover it. They're calling and they're asking, and to not just take that as nope, I'm not going to even bother, to just get information out there, be updated on what's going on as things are changing. And there's things in legislation right now that we don't have the answers to. So just be up to date on everything and be aware and just be ready.
Sure. So in closing, Chinda, did we publish all of our poll questions? Last question here, a really good one. I expect there will be no recourse for damages due to COVID-19 other than potential U.S. government new acts. What do you think?
I think it's really going to depend on the litigation side of things. I mean, in terms of, if you're talking about recourse of people actually getting their claims paid, I mean, there is a possibility that it plays out that way. But I think you just never know how the court system is going to work out. There's plenty of times where you think a judge is going to rule one way and they do the exact opposite. So, that's definitely a possibility, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I'm not sure the recourse from damages, who they're referring to, the recourse from who. If they're talking about, I know there's a lot of talk from they want China to pay, or if we're talking recourses from the insurance companies. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different directions that litigation is going to go into, and litigation is going to go after. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So I think there's definitely going to be, people trying to get recourse against different agencies, companies, or whatever. But I'm not sure what's really going to hold water until it gets into the courts.
Squeeze in one last question. If a company files a claim and never follows through with it due to the coverage for COVID, will it impact their ability or cost in renewal in the future?
I mean, I guess it's going to depend on the company they're working with, but I mean, it usually can be costs related to filing claims. I mean, if you didn't follow through with it, it just depends on the company.
Yeah, I think it's usually based on, as with any other insurance that we have, your insurance rates go up because you filed claims, not just filed them, but they paid out on claims on your behalf. But I think given the situation of there's going to be so many claims paid out, are they going to put you, like health insurance companies do, into a pool of your region and then increase rates based on, the industry you're in or something like that? It might not even be related to, yes, you filed a claim, but it might be related to, okay, this industry or this region we paid out so much, so we're increasing the rates in that industry or in that region as a result of that. It might not be used specifically, even just because you filed it and didn't follow through. I think we might be seeing increases due to factors beyond your company's control.
Great. We have about 2 minutes remaining. There was a question about how do you get your CPE certificate. 7 to 10 business days after today, factoring also that Monday is a holiday, you'll be able to log into your account at nacva.com, and in the left-hand column, once you click on the My Account button, there will be a link to your certificates and CPE. From there, you can see the certificate from this course and print it, access it for any other purpose you need to provide attestation for attending. We have had a large number of individuals on our webinars over the past several weeks, hundreds of them actually, and we're processing them as quickly as possible. But 7 to 10 business days after today, you should be able to log into your account and see the certificate. Last thing I'd like to mention before we conclude is we have recorded, both Kerrie and Robert have prepared a 10-hour webinar series on business interruption and lost profits. It's available on demand. It's really in-depth course, really specific to planning for the engagement, the differences between policies, the period of restoration, the types of interruption calculations, and business opportunities. We're running that series live in August, also live in October, but it is available on demand, including CPE credit. The recordings that Kerrie and Robert have done this month will be added to this series, so increasing the total of the program from 10 hours to 14 will be posted to this product within the next probably 2 or 3 weeks. It'll take us some time to produce it and add it to this series. But if you're looking for more substantive training, you can join us live in August or October, or purchase the on-demand course, which does include CPE. Chinda, did we get all the questions in?
Yes, we did.
Great. Thank you, Kerrie, and thank you, Robert, for providing your time and expertise during this webinar. Thank all of you for joining us. If there's anything we can do as an association to support you or questions, there were a lot of questions related to business valuation. You're more than welcome to shoot me an email, and I can point you in a good direction to be connected with an instructor or a faculty member or someone who can help you. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you'll keep in touch through the nacva.com COVID-19 page, where we will be producing additional content, most for free, to help the profession and business owners grapple with these challenges that we're all dealing with during this crazy, crazy time. Stay safe and healthy, and have a great holiday weekend.
Thank you, you too. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And both Robert and I are here if you have any questions that we didn't respond to or didn't have a chance to get to during the webinar.
Great. All right.